Hey, everybody. Before we get started, I want to thank my friends at Hatch for producing this episode. You can get unlimited podcast editing and strategy for one flat rate by visiting hatch.fm. All right, let's get into the show. Welcome to Distribution First, the show where we flip content marketing on its head and focus on what happens after you hit publish. Each week, I share playbooks, motivations, stories, and strategies to help you repurpose and distribute your content because you deserve to get the most out of everything you create.
It's great to have you on, Justin. I've been following your content for a while now. We connected early on LinkedIn at some point when you were starting your content journey. And I must say, you have been one of the more influential people inside of my content creation process. And I'm always trying to look around the landscape and spying for people who are saying things that are easy to understand, that are relevant. And you surely struck a tone with distribution first. And so could you please tell the people what you do and how you create useful content for your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I run a small consultancy, solopreneur running my own business. And as far as creating useful content for my audience, I create useful content through the podcast Distribution First, a weekly newsletter, daily LinkedIn content, bigger and larger pieces throughout the year. And how I'm basically doing that for clients is helping them. A lot of times clients have a lot of content they are creating. And the problem with that is typically they are spending so much time creating that they don't actually think about how to get that content in front of the audience. It seems fundamental. It seems like it would be something a lot of companies would think about, but most of the time it's create, publish, create, publish, create, publish. And so I'm able to go in and actually help them build out a strategy, build out a plan, repeatable process to be able to consistently build distribution into their content creation process.
Oh, that's great. I know many companies, part of the drum you've been beating is that people have too much content and they don't know how to get it in front of people. In your case, you work for yourself. So how has it been creating content while being employed by yourself?
It's the best because I get to, I'm in full control, right? It's the best. Maybe it's the best and the worst, right? Like, I think it's probably true of like running your own business overall. It's awesome because you're your own boss, and it's the worst because you're your own boss. But for me, it's been really eye-opening because I'm in control of every single piece of it. I can run any test I want. I can just do different experiments. I can try different things and not be worried or be beholden to any particular metric or any particular like growth or, different things like that. I can really spend the time to think about what the audience needs or wants, validate those things, and then build on those as we go. And it really is fun. I mean, a super small example is for the podcast, like I started repurposing little micro clips out of older episodes and just calling them quick hits and putting them back into the feed just to see how the audience would react, right? Like I know for a fact not everybody's going back and listening to episodes from last April, but I know those episodes are really, really good and have lots of good content in them. So how do I pull out those nuggets and put them back in the feed? And it's been awesome. Like I would say for the typical podcast that I run, it's, a 30-ish minute, sometimes solo, sometimes conversation. And the quick hit might be 5 to 10 minutes of a quick segment. And I would say performance on those are probably right around 85, 90% of a traditional episode. And to me, that's a win-win right there. So it's just an example of how I'm able to test different pieces of content quickly, be able to pull things out, try new things without having to like be beholden to some like larger I can guarantee you in a larger org, I would have to make the pitch, run the test, all those type of things to be able even just to try that versus being able to just do it on a whim.
Yeah, that's so true. By the way, I've listened to every single episode, including the quick hits. I know you put out some recently, and I listened to those too. Those are good, and they kind of harken back to the early days of the podcast. The podcast was launched about this time last year, yeah?
Yep, almost exactly a year ago.
Yeah, it's like around, I see that you put on Twitter on February 8th, which is the day today that you were launching the podcast. So I know it's around that time. You mentioned experimentation. How important is experimentation to you in your content development process?
I think it's huge because you don't know what's going to hit or what's not going to hit. And I think having a mindset around experimentation helps you be a little bit more free in what you're creating. It's hard sometimes as a creator because even a traditional like content marketer, it's hard because you don't want to kill your darlings, right? Like you don't want to put all this effort into something that doesn't work. But I think if you separate yourself from that and say like, this is a big giant test. Everything is a test. Everything I'm doing is a test. LinkedIn is an example of that, right? Like some things hit, some things don't. Emails, some things hit, some things don't. I send out an email and it gets a 5% click-through rate and, boosts the listens on the podcast. Why was that versus the last one that got a 1% click-through rate? And so it's like just a constant test and experimentation of what's working and what's not. I think the downside of experimentation sometimes is you can either test the wrong things or you get down this rabbit hole of not being able to land on anything. But I think for the most part, experimentation is healthy and a lot of folks should focus on it as they're creating.
I mean, you don't know until you test it, obviously. Do you kind of ever get discouraged when you test something and you don't see it go the way you want it to go?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, it's like you think something is going to work or you have a hunch that it might and it doesn't. But I think like that failure should only be a learning if you're actually taking it the right way in terms of like, well, I'm not doing that again, one. And two, like, all right, I can kind of think through why that didn't work. Was it the timing? Was it the topic? Was it the subject line? Was it the hook? Was it, there's a variety of reasons of why something might fail. And that can be hard to nail down. Sometimes you don't know. But I think being comfortable with failure is hard. That's hard for me. Like comfortable with failure, comfortable with rejection, but like the more that you take action, the more that you're going to learn, the faster you're going to be able to iterate, the faster you're going to be able to experiment, the faster you're going to get on the right track.
Yeah, I like that. The more you take action, the faster you're going to learn what works, the faster you're going to learn the thing that actually will take you forward. The interesting thing about your process that I find it really stood out to me is that most people take a while to get to something that they own. So Jay Klaus, he talks about one thing that he would do or some things that he would do if he were to start YouTube over or start building his business from the start again. And one thing that he mentions is that he would own a term. So the term that he owns is creator science. You came out the gate swinging. You came out with distribution first, owning that term. But I know you were employed before at TechSmith and you had different experiences running content teams. Was that a happenstance? Did it happen by chance? Or did you like say, this is what it is? I'm going to come up with this exact thing. I'm going to stick to it.
Yeah, I mean, it was probably a combination of both. So I had the content repurposing roadmap course when I was full-time at Metadata, started doing that kind of on the side, left Metadata, still had that, and was trying to figure out like what the business was going to be, what the and especially when I started iterating on the podcast and what the name was because my business is, I don't really have a business name. It's me, I'm a solopreneur, but I needed something that could kind of stand the test of time and be the framework. Like I just know the power in names and I didn't set out to like, create a category or do, be these people like, oh, you gotta build a category around X, Y, and Z. I really didn't think of it in like that type of way, but I did think about it. Like I know the power of repetition. And I know the power of standing for something and being known for this thing. And it is funny because over the last few months, I mean, I started distribution first in, like you said, last year. And over the past few months, I keep seeing the term distribution first popping up in conversations. And it's like, okay, like even if they're just saying that without, maybe they don't even know I exist and that's okay. But to me, that's a sign that something's working and that this idea around distribution first is starting to take hold a little bit. that was ultimately the long-term goal, right? Was to build out distribution first, to have a distribution first framework that I can go implement with these companies and show them how it works. So there was forethought, but it did take time to come up with it. And thankfully it stuck.
Yeah. Are you okay with being known as the distribution first guy?
I mean, if I'm going to be known for something, I think that'd be it at this point. You know, I'm always open to adjusting. Like, I don't know in 5 years if I'll be distribution first guy, but I think for right now, like, I'm A-okay with that, because at the end of the day, and this is true because people tell me it, like, Justin equals distribution first, you know. It's helpful because as of right now, the competition is low in the mind share around distribution. Like, it's me and Ross Simmons. Like, we chat about it. Like, that's about it, right? And so with a little bit, you know, people talking about it sort of tangentially as a subtopic, but really for me, like, nailing down a single piece around a single idea has been very, very helpful, because especially starting my own business, because if you're a video marketer and there's 50 video marketers, what makes you unique? Why you? You know, if you're a podcast production company, okay, there's like a ton of them. So which makes your podcast? What do you stand for? What is your way of thinking around podcasting? So for me, it was content marketing. And the funny thing with distribution, and I was just telling somebody this the other day, distribution, whenever I get into a company and I start helping them with distribution, it ultimately helps me understand their content strategy and where their content strategy gaps are. Because when you start peeling out what you're going to share and how you're going to share it and what your messages are and all those type of things, it shines a bright light onto your overall content strategy. And do you have content worth sharing? Are you sharing it on the right channels? Are you creating, you know, is the intent proper, right? Like, are you creating thought leadership content and hoping Google picks it up? Are you creating content for Google, hoping you can repurpose it on social, and mixing those channels up? So really, it's been a fun journey.
Lovely. So let's get a little deeper into those things, how it works, how distribution first works. And today in particular, we're going to talk about building momentum after a content launch. And we're going to dive into these distribution and repurposing strategies. So tell me, what do you mean by building momentum? What is that?
I think building momentum to me comes down, and it really is in two different ways. You can build momentum macro around a topic or an idea, and you can build momentum around a specific piece of content. And so taking those two things in both your hands and trying to build a plan that really works both of those at the same time. So an example, if you have traditionally, maybe you have a gated piece of content around a framework or something that like your business in particular sells, right? In a traditional sense, you might gate that ebook, gate that guide, gate that playbook, run some ads to it, hope people sign up, and that might be it. Or you'll send some emails, use it as cold. The problem with that is there's so much value, hopefully, so much value in that piece of content that's untapped, that your audience has no clue about that it exists, that you have this framework. Why would I want this framework? What are the problems? And so building momentum to me is taking, if you have that piece of content, what are all the ideas inside it that we can put out into the market, share those things, and then bring those people back in to when, if they pop open that ebook after they get it or that guide and they see the same thing you talked about, it's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing, because it's hitting that point again and be like, oh, okay, that was what you were talking about there. I do this with my course. I pull stuff out of my course all the time and drip that out on LinkedIn, drip that out on emails. And it's not anything different than what's in the course, but I'm doing that purposefully because it's going to take people more than just watching one course video or reading one LinkedIn post or reading one newsletter to be able to understand the ideas, the concepts, the problems, the frameworks, all those type of things. So building momentum is all about building momentum around that idea and making sure after I hit publish on this ebook, on this blog post, on this video, this webinar, not only that the content lasts, I'm actually less concerned about the content itself, the piece itself, like that this webinar is going to keep getting click after click after click, month after month. but that the ideas and the concepts are going to get consumed through these different distribution channels month after month after month. And then if you want to watch the webinar or you stumble across it or we somehow, share that as an option, now you're even more engaged to want to consume that content.
Mm-hmm. And so it seems that you're saying that it's in the best interest of any business for them not to force their audience to exchange their email for content. Is that what you're saying?
It's an option. It's just limiting the reach of the idea. You can do that. I mean, even at a most basic example, like I technically do that with a newsletter. To read the newsletter, you have to sign up. But what I can do is take that newsletter and the ideas that are out of it, and I can pull those ideas back out and share them so that even if you're not on the newsletter, you can get the ideas. And I do that all the time. Same with the podcast. You don't have to listen to the full podcast or pull the ideas out of the podcast and pull the clips out of the podcast. And you can consume them, natively right on LinkedIn or in your inbox, and you don't have to listen to a full 40-minute podcast. So it's really about just getting you can keep it gated, but it's sort of like keeps those ideas in jail. It keeps them in a cage. Like you're really narrowing the amount of people you have that will consume that as a percentage of your audience.
I agree with you. I asked you that question deliberately because I think if we were to think about it even more critically, that the reason people sign up for your email list in the first place is because they've seen something. They've heard something. No one signs up for company updates like we're doing this, we're doing that, this is what we're doing. No one cares. But if I get content from you, which has happened, this is a real case with myself and with your content, this is useful to me. This gives me value. So therefore, if I go and you ask me to sign up immediately, there's no question. So I'm making the commitment knowing that there is something that I saw or interacted with or interfaced with that already gave me value. So I agree with you 100% on that.
Yeah. And I think it's a shift. It depends on the type of org. It depends on how you're set up is a huge piece of that. Like a lot of content marketers, if you're in-house, like you don't have control on how your sales organization is set up and how they're goaled and how they need leads to be able to try. Like if that's the case, then I understand why people are gating and why people are using MQL, SQL, all those type of things to try to drive that. We don't necessarily have control over that. But I think, and that's why I say you don't have to ungate the thing, but you can now, what you can do is ungate the information and then tie it back to where, hey, if you want to dive into the entire framework, we have a whole guide that shows how to do this. If you want the template, we have a whole, that go get it. We have this thing, go get it. But the only way that you're going to be able to, I think, not the only way, but probably in the majority of the correct way, the way people actually interact with content these days is to gain that trust before they go put in their email address. They're not just going to go blindly like, oh, I guess I'll go get this guide, right? Like it's building that trust and making them want to sign up. It's one thing to say, sign up for my newsletter, like you said. It's another thing to say, super valuable tip, little bit of a tease. Hey, here's what I'm dropping in the newsletter tomorrow. If you want it, make sure you sign up. That's a much more enticing offer, if you will, than just, hey, I've got a newsletter. You should sign up for it. Trust me.
Yeah. I think so. I think most times, and this is just me, I don't know if you've done this in the past, like when somebody has like a download or some bit of information that I think might be interesting, but I don't know, I just kind of stumbled across it somehow. I tend to send them to the graveyard. The email graveyard is what I call it. So an email I never check. I just put that in and that goes there. All the valuable people come to my main email and I read what they send. So I don't know if you have done that.
Absolutely. And I bet that's most people. And again, that's the trouble with basing leads off of just a simple email without any qualification. I'm much more interested in using content as a long-term building trust and building brand. And that way, when I come to the sales team, I'm ready. You've convinced me. Let's roll. And how much better is that at a lower volume? Obviously, it'll be a much lower volume, but higher quality.
Yeah, definitely. Great, great, great. I'm glad you set that platform. So let's get a little deeper into the momentum. So you believe that most companies, and I've heard you say this over and over again, most companies don't have a plan. They just hit publish and move on rather than to build momentum and plan to get the content. They just create it in front of the audience over time. Why do you believe that this is true for most companies?
That's a deep question. I think some of it honestly comes down to priority, because what is prioritized will get done. What is not prioritized will not get done. So some of it is in like true, like a need, like we must do this. Like it's one thing to say, I need to go to the gym. It's another thing when you need to go to the gym to starve off, some sort of life-threatening illness or something like that, right? Like there's a different thing to say, I need to do this versus I need to do this. I must do this. And that's a mindset shift. And so I think being able to shift that mindset within a company to say like, all right, we're done with this. We're running on the hamster wheel. We've been creating a ton of content. We're flatlining on traffic. We're not building things up. It's just not working. Why? And I think a lot of the companies I work with get to that point where they're doing a lot of things, but the things aren't tied together. And so I think when you're talking about building momentum, it's really building momentum. Like content marketing in so many ways is marketing today in general, in terms of how you're getting your messages out there. And so it's like everything from understanding what's the point of view of the company, how that point of view filters into the content you're creating, how the content you're creating filters up to the features and the products that you sell. And what I find is that a lot of times all of those things are disparate. You have random or honestly no opinion because you're trying to hit everybody. You don't distribute your content well enough, and you end up never tying it back to anything you sell. And so how's your audience supposed to know what you do, how you help them, what problems they have? And so it's using a core piece of content and then being able to deliver on that consistently. Like for me, it's a podcast. For a lot of companies, that might be a blog, might be a video series, might be a monthly webinar, using those and then having bigger pieces that help validate and might draw in more people. That could be anything from like a virtual event. That could be a big research report, different things like that throughout the year. But I think what happens for a lot of companies is that they end up trying to fill all those lanes with a lot of stuff. Like we're doing a lot of stuff and we think it's going to work, but they don't actually have, like you mentioned, they don't actually have a plan laid out to even say like, oh, do we have enough bandwidth to execute on this well? Do we have enough distribution bandwidth? Or like I've worked at companies and worked with companies that are creating so much stuff, they literally can't get it out because there's not enough LinkedIn posts and not enough emails and not enough things that they can send in a day without overwhelming the audience. So like, what's the point of creating 3 blog posts and a press release this week if we can't tell everybody about it?
Yeah, that's so true. And so you need a plan, and you help people with those types of plans. So before they start creating anything, they should have a plan for how they're going to distribute these things. And so let's talk a bit about the plan. When somebody approaches you, what is the first thing you look at when telling them how to fix this problem of little or no distribution?
It usually starts with an assessment of what they have going on, understanding overall their marketing, what points they're trying to get across, what messages they're trying to get across, how it ties back to product, all those type of things. Just get an understanding of the marketing mix, what they're creating, just to kind of see the overall health of the program. And then it's funny because one of the first things I look at is what is their points of view on any given topic. Because I think especially for like LinkedIn content, newsletter content, even for a company, having a point of view, a stake in the ground, a reason why anybody should pay attention to you is so vital right now. And it often gets skipped and not looked at. And so it's one of the first things I do is look at what are your overall content themes. So like what are the main topics that you want to touch on? Typically we'll start at a quarter. So like for Q1, if I'm coming in like, okay, what are the main things like at the end of Q1? Do you want people to start doing that association with you, right? And okay, these are the themes. Okay, what are our points of view about each of those themes? And now you can start drilling it. And I have a whole bunch of exercises that work with people on. And then from there, now we can start to see, all right, these are our themes. These are our points of view. Do we have any existing content that we can repurpose, redistribute that fit these topics and these themes? Is there anything out there that we don't have to create brand new, start from scratch, that we can start getting back out into the motion? If yes, we start working on those things. If no, we start ideating on future content as well and try to build that plan to where your content hits those themes, hits those points of view, mapped out over time, and then obviously figuring out channels where your distribution is, and then building a building an actual flywheel for that content to be able to get distributed every single week and have a floor. Like, what can you actually do? And I'll ask that, like, what can you actually execute on? Like, we'd love to be doing YouTube, and we'd love to be doing LinkedIn, and we'd love to be doing X, Y, and Z. And it's like, okay, well, what do you actually have bandwidth for? Who do you have video people on your No, we don't. Okay, well, then we're not going to worry about YouTube right now. Do you have copywriter, people who can do emails? Yep. Okay, we've got a motion in place. We've got, okay, cool. So let's try to build that motion out and understand, like, after this piece of content, and that's when you start to build the flywheel. After this content is released, blog post, whatever, like, what happens? And going through that discussion of, like, what happens after. And it typically revolves around, most of the B2B companies I work with, at a minimum, it's, okay, blog post, and then LinkedIn content written off of that would be just a very generalized thing that then either can or can't point back to the original blog. With the way LinkedIn's working right now, it seems more better not to point back to the original blog because there are discouraging such things. But that's at a very, like, high level how I start to think through and work through with companies, is building that muscle into, after they're creating content, they know what's next. So after I write the draft and get it going, I'm going to start pulling out the individual things. It's no different than a podcast. After you publish a podcast, I hope you're going and pulling out the best clips. I hope you're going and finding the best segments and then doing something with them. It's no different for any other piece of content, webinar, blog post, etc. And then one of the cool things, and I just had this realization with a client the other day, talking with her, and she said, this is great, but it's actually going to change how I create content. Because once you figure out what you can or can't pull out of a blog post or pull out of an episode, after you've done it a few times, you start to realize, oh, I need better content to pull from. So it can actually change how you're going to create content before you even start.
Yeah, and I suspect too, that change in content will be like the structure as well. So instead of just doing a big block of talking, you then start to say, okay, this is my main topic. These are the sub points, 1, 2, 3. So that when I'm going to repurpose later on, I can pull this as a social post, or I can make a short form video out of this, if that's the direction that you're going in. If you're going in the opposite direction, like with long form video and going back, then you probably do it in the opposite way. Yeah, that would make complete sense if you're telling someone about that. And what have you seen though, in your experience, as is everything has a stress point, everything has a point of failure. What have you seen as the main point of failure for people trying to execute on distribution first and building their momentum?
By far, it's the muscle of doing it. It's building the consistency muscle. Consistency is probably the biggest thing. It's easy to, okay, we did that for one blog, and then we're falling back into the, there's no, it takes time to build it into the process. It's a habit. It's really no different than going to the gym in a lot of ways, right? Like, you can go to the gym, you can feel great, and then you can very easily never go again. We're at the beginning of the year. This is the time to talk about it, right? Or you can decide that it really is over even a mindset shift. It's an identity shift to, this is how we create content now. We create content in a way that we make sure it gets out in front of our audience. I think part of the problem is that folks don't slow down on the creation side either. So they want to add a lot of distribution just plopped on top of their still create, and that creates a bandwidth issue, because if you don't take anything away, how are you going to add something on? Unless you're like In some cases, that's why people bring me in. Like I end up being their distribution person where I'm coming in and figuring all this stuff for them so they can just keep creating. And that's fine, but you got to kind of think through that. And so I would say consistency is huge in terms of figuring out a plan of when to do it. I advise like both coaching clients that I work on one-on-one and folks where I come into their actual businesses. I advise that they batch the work. So I have a distribution doc. I have some momentum map worksheets that I have for folks. And I always advise like just batch it. Sit down, dedicate an hour, 2 hours maybe to write, get all the stuff figured out, and then just like you would with a blog post, then give yourself time to come back and edit it. Give yourself time to come back, take a step away. Don't feel like it can be super overwhelming to be like, I got to come up with, 10 LinkedIn posts off of this blog or 5 links. Like oh my gosh. So it's like, batch it out, give yourself that time, throw it on your calendar block. If you know you've got a blog post coming out every single week, comes out on Tuesdays, let's say, maybe Monday afternoon or Tuesday at some point, or even Wednesday after the fact, somewhere within that week, you've got time dedicated to start pulling those things out and be able to distribute it.
Yeah. It seems like one of the biggest hurdles in being able to do the thing in a better way is just your mindset. It seems like that's a massive hurdle. It seems like, because when I think about it, when I think about our content strategies, it is normally resources problems. Like there's human resource problems, technical resource problems, and time resource problems mainly. But we haven't really talked about what it takes, the way your thinking has to shift. Because what you described just now is someone trying to shoehorn a new system into old habits. Mm-hmm. And it seems like that's the case. Do you, as part of your talking with companies, addressing that directly?
I think so. And it's actually like for my business, like if I just look at the folks I consult with, it's much better for me and them if they come in knowing they want to change. We can get there. It's just slower if there's bigger organizational shifts, if they're, because there's typically more layers than just like, how do we distribute our content? There's a lot that goes into a marketing program, a content program, all those type of things, depending on the size of the company. But for folks who come in and are ready and I say, you know what, I'm good. We know we're creating stuff, but we just want a better system. We'll change. We're willing to figure it out and adjust and figure out how it goes. Best possible scenario. But yeah, like let's say like with a coaching client, for instance, like how do I get to that point? A lot of the work is mindset. A lot of the work is habit. A lot of the work is building the systems to be able to do it. Because let's face it, for a lot of companies, like they don't have 5 or 6 content marketers. They probably have 1 or 2 and some freelance help. And so like, how do I manage that? And I think another thing that I would say is with a piece of content, big, small, however, macro repurposing, micro repurposing, however you want to frame it up, there are infinite options. There are unlimited almost number of ideas that you could come off of any given thing. There are endless formats that you could create. I could create a short about this, and I could do a long form video about that, or I could make. What you have to do is either keep a running list of those things and just house them for future reference. So do that, but then also you have to like just figure out what the floor is. Like, what am I actually going to do every week? Like every single week, I'm going to do X and have that floor, because that floor is a consistency for you. You're not going to lose your mind because every single Monday you're going to come and be like, what are we creating this week? And the floor is also consistency for your audience. Okay, Justin sends an email every Saturday. Justin releases a podcast every Tuesday. Justin posts on LinkedIn every day. And again, that's just my play, and I ebb and flow on that. And there are different frameworks you can do even within those, right? Like you could do a particular topic cluster. Every Tuesday, I talk about X. You could do a topic cluster for any given quarter. For Q1, we're going to go all in on Y. And we're just, by the end of Q1, people are going to know exactly about what Y is. And we're just going to talk about all the different assets of it. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah. There are 2 big points that you made that I think is very important. Let me see if I remember them now. So the first, I think the thing that you said that really stood out to me was the fact that it's customizable. Like everyone has a different solution to their distribution problem. It's very much customizable and it's not a one size fits all. That's why you need to look at the systems, look at everything you've been doing, and then figure out what actually works for yourself, for your business model, for what you want to accomplish. That's the first thing. The second thing I think was really very important that you said that I want to highlight, especially for the business owners listening, is the idea of expectation, that your audience has expectation and that you build that relationship by being consistent and fulfilling those expectations. That you mentioned Tuesday was a release day. You ship on Tuesday, and doing that consistently gives people a place that they can come to and expect what they, a particular thing. And I think that's so very important. It's like the difference between you navigating to a location and then realizing this office has moved totally. That would be that would be wildly disappointing to you if that were to happen to you. So why treat your content that way? Why treat your content in a way that somebody comes expecting anything and then it's not there and there's no communication? So I think in terms of maintaining the audience, growing them, and having respect for them as well, that fulfilling those expectations are extremely important.
Yeah. And for anybody who's running their own business, working in-house, any of those type of things, being consistent alone will put you darn near the top 5% because most people stop. Most podcasts don't get over 8 episodes. I think over 50% of podcasts that are on Apple have 2 episodes on them. Just consistently showing up is already going to put you above the bar. And then obviously from there, it's quality content, it's at scale, it's how do you do that? How do you build a system to build that out? But I think most people and most companies overestimate the amount of content that they need because again, they think I have to publish a blog twice a week on so I can show up for my audience, even though your audience isn't showing up on your blog. When really what you need is show up every day where they're at. And that requires a completely different skill set and a completely different type of content because it's harder and easier in some ways to create short form content. It's a little bit more throwaway. It's a little bit less, I have to invest a ton in it, but it is harder because you're trying to condense ideas down to a small amount of time. But I think just understanding the amount of content that you actually need, where you need to show up consistently is huge. That's the distribution first model, as well as like understanding like what channels are you focusing on? Where do you need to be? And then from there, reverse engineering out how much content do you need? I use this example all the time, but if you're a traditional B2B company or a business owner and you say, I got to be on LinkedIn 5 days a week. If you're on LinkedIn 5 days a week, which most people are not, like 1% of content creators on LinkedIn are probably posting 5 days a week. If you're posting 5 days a week, that's only 20 pieces of content, 20 small little pieces of content you need every single month. And if you're writing a blog post a week, if you're doing a webinar on top of that, if you're also, and you think about all this content that a company produces every single month, you absolutely can get 20 pieces of content out of that. You probably could get 100 pieces of content. And so being able to distill that down and say, oh, if I only need 20, do I need to do a blog and a podcast and a this and a that and the other and the other and the other? The answer might be no, unless you have other goals and other metrics and other things, other distribution channels that you're trying to use those for. But it's a good guardrail to start and reverse engineer toward.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. And I think, this has led us to a place in the conversation where we could go deeper and talk about the alignment of content ideas, goals, audience, and distribution. But what I want you to do as we kind of come in for the ending here is to share any last big idea or thoughts that any business owner will have to take with them or can take with them in order to begin to approach content marketing in a way that is in alignment with how people actually consume content today. What would that big thought or that idea be?
I think the biggest thing for me recently has been around creating platform native content. So understanding where you're putting content and in the expectation of the audience where they're at. So for example, if I'm on LinkedIn, I'm not looking for how to do anything in particular. I'm simply scrolling and looking to get dopamine hits. So that being said, if your content on LinkedIn is, hey, we're talking with X, Y, and Z next Friday on our webinar, make sure to sign up with our link in the content, boy, I'm blowing past that real fast because I'm not going off platform. I'm not interested in signing up for anything. I'm just looking to like get a quick hit coming through the feed. So the difference on that is, what topic are you going to be talking about on that webinar? What problem would your audience have in that webinar that you're going to talk about? What are the, the pain points that you are going to solve in that webinar? And then talk about one specifically, and then say, oh, by the way, next week, we're going to have a webinar that deep dives into this. If I have spent the time to get hooked in, get value, become interested, and I may or may not have the time to attend that webinar next week, but you at least have a much better shot than just saying, hey, we've got this thing. And so it's being able to, again, pull the value out of whatever you're doing and sharing it natively where it's at. Because, again, understanding somebody coming in their inbox may or may not want to just go click off and do the thing you want them to do. They probably want a little bit of value coming out of that. What's in it for me? I think that's the biggest thing, is for especially business owners, is it's not what's in it for you. It's what's in it for the audience. And just giving over time, it never goes out of style.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's a good way to end it off. Giving over time never goes out of style. And I think we kind of started there and we went all the way around and came back on the importance of being able to share these ideas freely so that people can come back to get the main value. So Justin, some people may want to find you online and see where your content is at. Could you share with the people where they can find you online?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me at, if you want to check out my website, see what service I have, justinsimon.co. If you're interested in the podcast, you can go to distributionfirst.co. And if you're looking for me on LinkedIn, it should be just Justin Simon. You'll see me on there giving constant tips every single day, trying my best to provide value over there as well.
And your colors are green these days, right?
That's right. Everything's green.
Everything's green. Everything's green. I would think there are like a million Justin Simons on LinkedIn.
There probably are. So yeah, if you search Justin Simon or search Distribution First, you'll find me in one way or the other. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Distribution First, and thank you for listening all the way through. I appreciate you so much. And I hope you're able to apply what you learned in this episode one way or another into your content strategy as well. Speaking of strategy, we have a lot of things going on this year that are going to help you build your brand, 10x your content, and transform the way you do content marketing. Make sure to subscribe to the show and sign up for my newsletter at justinsimon.co so you don't miss a thing. I look forward to serving you in the next episode as well. And until then, take care, and I'll see you next time.